It was raining, of course it was, so we decided to visit somewhere indoors for once, in case Jeannie Mackintosh developed the ague. We chose Heskin Hall, which I'd never heard of, built in 1555 with 15 hearths. Don't ask me why it had 15 hearths, presumably the architects had anticipated a very cold building. Originally, Heskin Hall was owned by Edmund Dudley, Minister for Henry VII. He wasn't a very good minister, in fact, he was executed for treason. Then Heskin Hall was owned by John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland. He was executed by Queen Mary. Next in line was Robert Dudley, who was executed by Elizabeth I. All in all, they weren't very successful aristocrats. We've no idea who owns Heskin Hall nowadays. Hopefully not the bloke at reception who bragged about making a fortune out of porno films. He might have been joking, it was difficult to tell. And how Blackpool had gone downhill since the Monkeys had moved in. We're not entirely sure what he meant by the Monkeys. Presumably not the popular 1960s American band, but it sounded racist, so we buggered off to look at the rest of the building. It wasn't what we'd expected. Far from being a perfectly recreated snapshot of a bygone era, riddled with woodworm and damp like most old Lancastrian halls, Heskin turned out to be some sort of massive junk shop masquerading as an antique dealer. There was everything for sale, from yellowing copies of the Dandy to Cromwellian suits of armour and the severed heads of former victims of a bored aristocracy. An eclectic mix of the ancient and mouldy, all piled up around the 15 hearths and 5-inch thick wooden doors. It was our sort of place really, with the exception of the wedding chapel. Presumably that's how the owners make their money, because despite the obvious appeal of manky old tat, they didn't appear to be selling much. The nouveau riche, with a leaning towards period homes, have to keep these old haunts going somehow, after the original aristocrats had bankrupted themselves through alcohol and gambling. Wedding venues and paintball battlegrounds are the obvious solution. As you might expect, the place is haunted. A girl called Matilda, accompanied by an old man, both of them dating from the Civil War period, had been witnessed hanging around one of the many rooms. Apparently guests are hastened to depart whenever the ghosts are seen. According to the bearded bloke at the reception, this has nothing to do with the drains. Matilda was hanged by a Catholic priest, her swinging corpse discovered by Cromwellian soldiers. The priest, presumably now the old man ghost, claimed that he'd carried out the murder as evidence for his conversion to Protestantism. Oliver's army weren't convinced. They hanged him from the same rafter as Matilda, as evidence for their conversion to rough justice from feeble bullshit. We didn't see the ghosts. We did hear Matilda, however, screaming somewhere, stupidly in the distance, or somebody's annoying kid was at any rate. Oliver Cromwell stayed at Heskin Hall, along with every other pub, barn and farmhouse that desperately needs some free publicity. Several religious martyrs were also hanged there. Those rafters have been remarkably busy over these centuries, so wonder they haven't collapsed beneath the weight. Once we got bored of spare rooms and closets, we took a gander at the shopping village next door, basically two converted cowsheds with more cafes between them than actual shops. We didn't bother going inside. Instead, we'd heard that a Jacobean farmhouse called Barmskin or Barmcake or something was situated at the other end of the narrow road. So we drove down to take a look, not realising that since our map was originally published in 1952, the road had been blocked off. We spent the next 45 minutes reversing, or at least Jeannie Mackintosh did. I stood behind the car, shouting instructions along the lines of, "Right, no, right, you stupid woman, it's a hand you right with, for God's sakes." By now, the seemingly interminable rain had eased, although the sky still remained the same grubby purple and grey colour as Jacob Rees-Mogg's skin. Down the road from Heskin, the one that isn't cordoned off by a great big lump of concrete, stands Eccleston Church, aka St Mary the Virgin. There's been a church next to the Grade 2 listed bridge at Eccleston since 1049, although the current building is said to have gone up around 1182. There's some interesting stuff inside, such as part of a Saxon cross found in the ditch in 1915, a 13th century font, the remains of an even earlier Norman font, an altar tomb belonging to William Hall, the rector of Eccleston from 1493 to 1511, and various other ancient curios. Unfortunately, the door was locked, so that buggered up any chances of us getting any footage of them. However, outside there were plenty of old graves to keep us entertained, including a couple of repurposed ones, presumably by cost-cutting corpses. One gravestone had found its way into the steps near the Lich Gate. Why it was there we couldn't honestly say, presumably another cost-cutting exercise. There were also a couple of cock-shaped weather vanes or something on the 15th century tower, and an effigy of Obi-Wan Kenobi above the porch, which was cool. St Mary the Virgin has a sister church at nearby Euxton. It's always good to have family. Also called St Mary's, although originally it was known as Bird Chapel, it was built in the 14th century for the Molyneux family of Heskin Hall. In appearance, both churches are very similar, both being constructed from red sandstone with no-nonsense architecture. Both also have ancient repurposed graves and a fine selection of 14th century interior accessories, such as, in Euxton's case, a piscina and a sedilia, which I thought was some sort of punctuation mark, to be honest. Unfortunately, much like the other St Mary's, we couldn't film inside because the door was locked. One crucial difference between St Mary's Part 2, this time it's personal, and St Mary's Part 1 is the incongruous bell tower, which looks as though Sir Clough Williams Ellis was sitting on the church planning committee the day it was commissioned. Also worth a mention are the old sundial, the even older font that they stuck outside and reused as a plant pot, and the rather knackered looking Norse cross base. The local historians have the latter down as a 16th century weeping cross where coffin bearers could rest their heavy burdens, especially those of fat dead aristocrats, and have a butty. It's late, and who am I to argue? Right, enough. Go and buy a Rupert Bear annual at Heskin Hall. They're worth quite a bit on the collector's market nowadays. Click like, subscribe if you want, and hopefully we'll be back again before you can convert to Protestantism and murder a noisy kid.